Dialogic Disciple is an invitation
to explore discipleship
in dialogue with the world as disciples of the Word. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Dialogic Disciple Podcast. My name is James and I'm here with my co-host,
Elizabeth.
We have a very special guest with us today. It's a faithful servant of the church, somebody who makes it possible for us to enjoy worship on Sunday mornings.
Whether you're in the building or at your very own home.
Exactly. We have Mr. Newsome with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I enjoy what I do every single week. It's a total pleasure.
Yes.
Total
Yeah.
I tell people when they say you work at a church, you only work on Sunday. No.
No, not at the north side.
Not at Northside, no. But if you can't hear it and see it and even experience it, then you're not getting the message.
That's right.
So that's what we do.
That's awesome. That's great. Well, we've been on hiatus for a little bit, but we are back now for the season of Advent and into the new year, and we're excited to be back on the air, back behind the mics, and talking a little bit about. Today, we're going to talk about tradition and experience as relates to our Advent devotional this year. So let's start with the conversation. Let's start with the question: what does tradition mean to you?
History is,
okay,
to me.
Okay.
Also, sharing experiences over and over. And learning from them each time.
Yeah.
Sometimes you learn and sometimes you don't learn and you suffer the consequence later. It's true. But I think for me, it is very much enjoying what life has been given to you and you're working through that. But also the experiences. I mean, the experiences to me is number one is tradition, and if you enjoy it, you'll do it again. If you don't, you won't do it again. And sometimes that's
interesting.
To me, that's tradition.
So I hear you. So that's fascinating because what I hear you saying is that for you, tradition and experience are tied together. They are the same thing almost. Like a tradition is just an experience that you decide to repeat.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
That's fascinating. I wonder how does that fit within our rubric for Advent, I wonder.
I think it completely collapses the whole dichotomy.
That's
okay.
Good. Well, that's kind of what
it was nice that you had me on.
And we'll see you next week, folks. Okay, so how many times do you have to do something, or do you have to have an experience for it to become a tradition? For you to label it, oh, this is a tradition now, this is a thing that we do.
It can be once. It doesn't necessarily have to be over and over 10 times. If you have had an experience that was fantastic, that you learned from, that you admired, whether it's with other people or even by yourself, once you have that experience, if it's pleasurable and worth it, you'll look at yourself and you'll even say internally sometimes, I'm going to do this again.
Yeah.
This is going to be a tradition.
Yeah.
And because I liked it and it worked, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Then you do it again, in my opinion.
Okay. So one of the things that we are wrestling with in this devotional and during the season of Advent and Christmas is the fact that tradition and experience, especially when it comes to matters of the faith, need to be held in tension with each other, right? You can't have one without the other. And so one of the things that means, I think, is that tradition comes alive with experience. Without experience, tradition is dead. And experience needs some form of tradition in order to give it meaning or value. And when we have an experience that happens outside of any kind of an experience that is so different and new that we can't figure out how to make sense of it, we oftentimes will go back to our tradition to try to make sense of it. And we see that in the birth of Jesus Christ. And one of the things that we're talking about in this devotional is also in the experience of the Israelites in slavery with Moses and the Red Sea crossing and all of that stuff. So what you've said is, I think, goes along with exactly what we're talking about, because what you're talking about is the life that experience gives to tradition.
Very much so. I think that every day is an experience.
Yeah.
Every single day that you wake up, you're going to experience something maybe the same or maybe different.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's a little different,
Right.
You don't want it to be the same every single day, or else why?
Right.
Why?
Then you get caught in a Groundhog Day situation, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't want to be Bill Murray.
That's what that movie is.
Yeah.
That movie is about an existential crisis of waking up and doing the same thing every single day. That movie is about our lives, our daily lives, right? It's not just a fairy tale. It's a
and he grows bored with it, so he wants to change it.
Yeah.
He goes out of his way to change it to make it better for his experience.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. I think that the more that you can experience your day-to-day lives and the things that happen in your day-to-day life experience, it's fascinating.
Yeah. It
is totally fascinating. And I trust, going back to the religious side of this thing, I do trust in God very much so, that he plans it out for me. When he wakes me up, he says, here's where we're going.
Yeah.
And I listen, and I go in that direction. When I don't listen, that's when trouble happens, and you got to be careful.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's so true.
Yeah.
And so I don't go against the grain. I just listen. I pray every morning. I pray every night. And I just listen. Sometimes I have to sit down and just be quiet and not do anything and just listen, because that helps build my experiences every single day.
Yeah.
Every single day. And along with it comes those traditions that are formed out of those experiences.
Yeah, that's great.
That's really cool.
So it sounds like to me that you do a little bit of prep work for the experiences you're going to have.
Absolutely.
You prepare yourself for the experience.
Absolutely.
And that itself is the tradition. I mean, right? You pray every day, you pray every morning, you pray every night.
Correct.
That's a tradition that you have that prepares you for the experience.
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah,
exactly right.
I like that a lot.
And you have to be open. Because if you're not open to change, if you're not open to listening, then you're going under your own judgment, and sometimes that's not very good.
That's been my experience and my tradition, for that matter.
So true. I know James well enough.
That's great. That's funny. So let's talk a little bit about how. Well, let me ask two questions. So the first question I want to ask is, when have we found ourselves in that monotonous, like repetitive, like we're going through the motions of some kind of tradition. Again, we're specifically talking about faith traditions here, but I think we can expand it to include all of life. All of life has faith elements to it.
Sure.
But when have we found ourselves in that monotonous kind of day in, day out, going through a tradition of life without feeling any real experience, any life, any newness to it? And what were the ways that we brought newness to those situations, or how did it change for us? Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I want to talk about.
So I've had this experience in relation to worship throughout my life. So I grew up Episcopalian, and I've gone through seasons where the liturgy feels very meaningless and very rote, and it's just words that I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I've had seasons where it's been the total opposite. So for a long time, it's where I grew up, and so when I was not in worship during like a season in college, and I'd go back to the church, and it was like just this beautiful homecoming, right? And I knew the words and I could speak them, and they became so meaningful to me because it was tradition, it was familiar. Right. And then after I kind of came back to church and I was a young adult and was going regularly, it kind of became more rote, right? And then when I came to Northside 10 years ago, I started going to the traditional service, and that was because I was like, I'm a traditional worshiper. Like, this is where I go. I do not go to contemporary worship. And so I went to the traditional service for several years. And it had that moment where it felt, it's just started feeling, boxy and, unfree. And that's absolutely nothing to say against our incredible team over there in the sanctuary. That's me. That's the experience I was having. Right. I was not able to bring life to it like it needed to. And my heart was not open to God in those spaces. And so I thought, all right, you know what? Let's just try. Let's just be bold, and let's walk over there to the Faith and Arts Center, and we'll just try out this little contemporary thing that they're doing. I'm sure it'll be terrible. We'll just try it. And it was this whole new experience. Right. And I felt God, and it was like this new way to worship, and the Spirit was just flowing, and it was just incredible. Mm-hmm. And so I've been doing that for the last couple of years, and I loved that service. And then last week, I had to I think I served communion, or I helped out with something in the 8:30 service. And I was over there, and it was the first time I had sat in a traditional worship for a while. And I had a whole new experience, and it was beautiful. Right. And those hymns and that liturgy, it just poured over me again. And it was that sense of wonder, and it was new again. And it was God.
It's refreshing.
Yeah.
Change is refreshing.
It is.
And
it wakes us up.
It's also terrifying, though.
Well, it is.
It can be. if you allow it to be.
Right.
But like I said, you pray that it's gonna work, and you go into it with an open mind and an open heart, and you experience it differently. And change is good. It is okay to change. I don't like to stay in rogue situations where everything's the same every single day. I'm an artist, right? So by nature, I have to be creative. I cannot just sit there and do the same thing over and over and over again. I had a college professor when I was in art school years ago, and he said, "You'll never be famous." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because you do every style that there is." So because I didn't have a specific style,
right,
I would not be hired to do my art.
Yeah.
Because people wouldn't know what they're going to get.
Right.
But I would do it all. I would do realism. I do abstract. I do watercolors. I do oils. I drew.
Yeah.
I did charcoal. It's whatever you want.
I did paint by number.
See, I did that too. I did the Last Supper, paint by number.
Nice.
3D mold. It was
Nice.
fantastic. But it was terrible. But I think that's because you have to accept and understand that change is going to be okay. And like you said, you had that epiphany because you were away from it for a while, and then you came back, and that was a change.
Yeah.
It was a change.
Yeah.
I would also say I think it has a lot to do with how we need to experience God. So we're all at different places in our lives, and I think sometimes, like, I have been in a season where I don't need God to be different. I need God to be steady and steadfast, and I need God to show up in that liturgy that is the same every week. That's what I need, because I'm in a season of chaos, and I need God to be exactly how I expect. There's some troubling things with that too, but it's a give and take. But I think it depends on who we are, and who we are changes, and how we need to experience God changes. And sometimes we need a God who shows up creatively, and we need the Spirit that moves and surprises us and engages us in different ways. And I think sometimes we need to know that God is steadfast.
Right. I think that makes sense. And the way you shaped that, or the way you said that, I think it speaks to your former experience you were talking about as well, in the sense that it took a great deal of courage for you to shift from one service to another.
Yeah.
But you were getting in this place where you're like, oh, this is stale for me, or it's not speaking to me. And so you had the courage to go over and try something different. And then the reward for that was when you went back to the traditional service, you had the experience that you'd had when you were younger or before.
Yeah. And hence the tradition.
Right. Yeah. Exactly, right? I do think there is something troubling about the idea of, well, this is what I need God to be this week, so this is what I'm going to do. And there's got to be an element where we are, like you were saying, Alan, open to the experience of God in a different way. But I do think the consistency of tradition is a gift from God himself, right? So this is a situation where this is the reason why God gave us the law, and it's the reason why Jesus didn't just dismiss the law, right? He didn't just dismiss the fact that it maybe not as, the law was made for us, not us for the law. And that's why it was made for us, in order to give us some rhythm and some consistency and some way and some direction.
Structure.
And the structure that allows us to then see when God does something new. Because if we're just living in a world that is total chaos, if we're living in a world where everything is new all the time, right?
Right.
Then nothing's new.
Then nothing's new, right? How could you ever tell what was God and what wasn't? Right? What could you tell is the order of God and what isn't? The whole point of order is to be able to see when chaos breaks in. That's not the whole point. But one of the benefits of order is that you can see when chaos shows up, and then you can discern whether that chaos might just be God doing something new.
Yeah.
That gives you a different experience of who God is.
Maybe a better way to say it is not that I need God to be this. Maybe I am seeking a reminder that God is, because I think God does show up in a lot of different ways. Like you're saying, God is steadfast, but God is also creative. Yeah. And so
clearly,
right. So I need the reminder that God is these things.
Yeah.
And we see that in different ways, because I agree with you. Just to clarify, it should not be what we need from God. That's that
no, but I understand.
Poorly worded,
I understand what you're saying. That's the season that you're in, where this is what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And I think I wonder how many people who maybe struggle with the service, whether it's contemporary service, traditional service, if their issue isn't like the way that we're doing something in a traditional service, the way we're doing something in contemporary service, but whether it's just there's an issue with them.
Yeah.
Right. How many times do we stop back? Do we step back and reflect and say, actually, I might be the issue here. right? And just to quote Taylor Swift, I'm the problem. It's me, right? And not.
You were just listening to Taylor Swift this morning, I know.
I listen to a lot of Taylor Swift because I have a Swiftie as a kiddo. So
yes, you do. Met her too.
I'm not complaining. No.
She'll be famous soon someday. I already know it.
For a whole different bevy of reasons.
But yeah, I do think I would say, I don't know, 99% of our experience of worship is based on ourselves and what we bring.
Right.
And we can criticize all day long, but I think
we have expectations.
Right. Yeah. Yes, exactly.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And that's the hard part, is when you have, and that's where tradition has formed you.
Yeah.
Because of your traditions, you have a certain amount of expectation, and you expect things to go your way.
Yeah.
And when they don't, that's not tradition. What happened?
Right.
What happened?
Right.
Yeah.
Something's broken.
Something's broken. But that's where you called it out, where it's law and order.
Yeah.
Pretty much, you need to have consistency and traditions to keep humans safe. I mean, if you don't, chaos will ensue, and then
it will swallow us all.
It'll swallow us all. I mean, and then that's where the Satan comes in.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not easy.
Have we talked about like the difference between God's tradition and human tradition? Because I'm thinking, we're telling this whole this story, this Exodus story, we're talking about Moses, and we have this faith tradition that tells us about who God is and where we fit into God's story.
Yeah.
So that's one type of tradition. But then there's also like human traditions, because I'm in seminary, and so I get to engage with a lot of different people from a lot of different worship backgrounds.
Right.
And last night, one of my classmates told a story about going to her parents' church, and the choir just sang something that was just completely phenomenal. And her instinct was to stand up and clap, because she was from a tradition that says that you stand up and you engage and your whole body, and you're clapping, you're cheering, because God has been praised, and that's the response. But that was not the church that she was in. The church was in, no one said a thing. It was contemplative. It was quiet.
Right.
The response was that was not a place for human response.
Right.
That's the tradition. And so we get these human traditions that collide, and one's not wrong, one's not right or wrong. It's just different. But then
we've got that right here at Northside, depending upon if you're contemporary or traditional, right?
Sure.
People in contemporary will do exactly that. They'll clap, they'll stand up and clap. And,
and
in traditional, that's a faux pas.
Years ago, I went to a different church that I'd never been to before, and they started speaking in tongues from the audience.
Oh, yeah.
And I had never experienced that ever in my life. And I thought they were being rude and just heckling the pastor.
Oh, wow.
I had no idea.
You didn't have,
And because nobody was interpreting at all.
Because you had no lens for
I had no lens for it. And so I'm sitting there, and they're sitting next to me, and they're yelling, and they're in a different language. Nobody understood. And I learned later, I thought, how rude. I learned later that they were speaking in tongues, and usually somebody will interpret.
Yeah.
The speech, and nobody was doing that.
Yeah.
And the pastor just stopped and let that person go on.
Yeah.
Just speaking in tongues. And it took me a few minutes, and then when I walked out, they said, "Oh, that happens a lot here."
So that's normal for their church.
Normal for their church.
Mm-hmm.
Totally it was tradition for them, but experience for you in some ways, right?
Experience.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's exactly the dynamic we're talking about. I had this similar kind of thing happen, except it was in reverse. In the sense that when I was probably 16, 17 years old, I was in worship in my church, the Church of the Nazarene, St. Luke's Church of the Nazarene in Ponca City, Oklahoma. And I don't know if you know anything about Nazarenes, but we don't do the tongues thing. We're like Baptists and Methodists kind of mixed together. And we're sitting there, and this guy comes in towards the beginning of the service, and he's dressed differently than the rest of us. He's dressed nicely. Like he's not in any way like off-putting in the way that he's dressed. He comes in and he sits down the very front row. Nobody's ever seen him before. And this is a small church, so everyone knows everybody. And we just thought he was a visitor, and that's cool. That's great. That's awesome. Like we love that. And the service continues on, and sometime after like the second hymn that we sang, he stood up and started speaking in tongues, and just he put his hands up in the air and started to speak in tongues, and nobody in the room knew what to do. Like we all knew what it was. Like we understood that that's what was happening, but we didn't understand what he was saying, and obviously there was no one there to interpret.
Wow.
And we just let him do it, and then he stopped for a while, and the pastor got up and preached, and then after that there's like another song, and he got up and did it again, and people just nobody talked to him after the service. He got up and just
guy.
walked out, and there was a couple guys towards in the what I guess what we would call narthex here, but in the lobby, what we call it in Nazarene Church, and they talked to him for a couple minutes or whatever. And I don't know, to this day, I don't know how that conversation went. Like I was watching it happen,
Right.
And there was some tension in that conversation, tension in a bad way. Ooh. And I don't know what was said to him or whatever. I never saw him again, so I don't know if he was just told like, "Hey, we don't do that here," or "Hey, tell me more about that." I doubt it was that, but tell me more about what you just did there.
And then he spoke, and they couldn't understand that, so it was even played worse.
But then, but they got me fascinated by the whole practice of tongues, and I had some friends who went to a charismatic Pentecostal church outside of town, and so I went with them a couple times and got the full kind of baptism of the Holy Spirit that happens in a situation like that. It's fascinating. It's an experience that I've never had, but it's one that I've witnessed, and it's one the Scripture talks about a lot. Paul talks about it a lot. Now Paul talks about it in ways that kind of, I think, are designed to curb somewhat curb that spiritual gift, but in any case, it is scripturally sound. It's fascinating that kind of radically different new experience.
Right.
And my tradition was just not prepared to embrace that.
Yeah.
Very similar, right, to when Jesus shows up and says, "Hey,
all right,
I'm the Messiah. I'm God."
Yeah.
Hey.
When the church starts
and
preaching,
weren't ready.
They were not ready.
Yeah, not ready at all. Sadly,
yeah.
we are today, or maybe not.
Or are we? Yeah.
Oh.
That's a bold claim, brother.
Yeah.
I like it though. I like it.
It was a rebuttal, or maybe not.
Or maybe not.
Maybe not.
So what are some ways then, and maybe we already talked about this a little bit, but the second part of that question that I asked, like, what are some ways that when we find ourselves stuck in a situation where it just seems methodical, or maybe our faith feels stale, or our life has become too predictable, I think a lot of people will say. What are some ways that we can break out of that? What are some ways that we can make ourselves open to new experience, especially in the faith realm?
You do like me, change churches.
Well, I was gonna say do like you and pray.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a huge start to say, like, God, I'm open to something new.
Right.
But how do you keep that prayer itself fresh? I mean, because if you're doing it every day, my guess is that eventually it becomes pretty rote. Standard kind of prayer. I've noticed this when I pray. I pray for our Bible studies before we begin our Bible studies,
right?
And I try to change it up now and then. I used to do this one prayer that I learned when I was in school. It was John Wesley's favorite prayer. It's part of our communion liturgy, and I used to do it all the time. But what I realized, there was one time when I was praying it, when I realized I wasn't actually praying. I was just saying words.
Correct.
And so I switched it up and did something else for a little while. And I've kind of written my own prayer now that I do. And now, just the other day, I was praying it again for the class, and I realized I was thinking about something else while I was saying it. I was not actually praying, so it might be time to switch it up.
Yeah.
Sometimes prayer can become, it's you should do it no matter what. But the Lord's Prayer we do every Sunday.
Yeah.
And I do the Lord's Prayer with my kiddo when I have her with me. But like, what is a way that you make sure that doesn't become stale?
A lot of times what I'll do is I'll pray for everybody that I know that needs prayer.
Okay.
And that changes
and
a
that's
lot.
A rotating.
Yes, it's constantly changing because I'm meeting new people all the time, not only in my line of work, but in my personal life as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll get a text from somebody that says, "Hey, pray for my dad.
Yeah.
He just got put in the hospital." And I always ask, "What's your dad's name?" So I can add that personal touch into that to keep it fresh, but also to recognize that person as an individual.
Yeah.
In the eyes of, in the ears of God, in the sight of God. And so to me, that's important. I also think that, sometimes you might make a list on a piece of paper of things that you should be praying about, and then look at that paper and then pray. Because if it's the same thing every single time you say it, like you said, it becomes rogue, it becomes trite, and it's something that you're thinking about something else and you're just saying the words.
Right.
And that's not true prayer.
That's not good.
In my opinion.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah. I've gone through seasons of writing prayers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that kind of changes it a little bit. It takes some diligence to do that,
Yeah.
but I really enjoyed that. You know?
My daughter, she kept a prayer journal.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And so she was always writing in her prayer journal, and she still does to this day. And I think she's got like 17 of them now, but that keeps her fresh.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
I've learned
That's a
from
great
that.
idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so mine are just on a notepad, and then when I'm done, I tear them up and throw them away. But,
Yeah.
but I've already prayed. You know what I mean? I don't
Yeah.
need to go back
that's
and look at
good.
them again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I want them to be fresh and different. You know,
Mhm.
something new.
Something in traditional worship that I used to do is I would intentionally change the emphasis of the words.
Ooh.
So, like force
Good idea.
myself, because we especially, in a congregation that's traditional and they're used to doing everyone, you kind of have that lilt that in the way that all the syllables come out when you're praying a prayer that everyone
Yeah.
prays every week.
Our
and
Father,
so,
who art in
right.
heaven,
And there's
hallowed
the
be
certain
thy
ups and
name.
downs. And so I would
Thy kingdom come.
intentionally change the lilt of my voice when I'm speaking it. And it would force
interesting.
me
Yeah.
to hear the words differently.
That's good. That's a good, easy way to do it.
Yeah.
You know, there was a hymn that was sung this past week, and it was to a different tune.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
That's fun.
That always
You know what I
makes
mean?
Yeah,
It was
it
something-
wakes you up a little bit.
And I thought, wait a second, I heard Cat Stevens sing this, years ago, and it was not the Cat Stevens that was being spoken in the word. It was very biblical, and I thought, wow, that's different.
Yeah.
But you see it and you hear it, and it's change and it's an experience.
How many different ways are there to sing Cats in the Cradle?
Man, apparently two.
What a song. Oh, my goodness.
Sorry.
So one of the things that we talk about this week in the devotional, really this first week in the devotional, we're just setting up what's to come. So we're talking about the backstory a little bit about how Moses comes to be. We're talking about Moses in conversation with Jesus and trying to spark some new experience into the season of Advent. But one of the things that we kind of lay the groundwork or the foundation for this week is we talk about the fact that Moses came out of a tradition and a family himself, the family of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and that Jesus himself comes out of that same tradition, the same kind of, they don't just show up, right?
Yeah.
They have this, they're deeply formed by a tradition before they can experience anything. So I wonder if we would be willing to take a couple minutes here and just talk about maybe some of the genealogy of our faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
The people in our faith, in our tradition, in our family, or in our history, who were formative for us to be able to be here today and have the experience of faith that we have today. So for me, I would say the person that comes to mind first for me is my grandmother. I talk about her quite a bit, and I talk about her in the sense of she was the pioneer, one of the pioneers of my faith. She's a very strong anchor in who I became, and a tether for me to the tradition of faith itself. I have little things that remind me of her everywhere in this office, and in my home. But it's a situation where I know that I would not be who I am today if it was not for her. And I think a lot of it, Alan, to get back to this kind of theme that we've kind of caught on to today is probably because of the prayers she sent up for me. It's not just the influence that she had directly upon me.
Is she living today?
She's not.
Okay.
She passed away about 22 years ago.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So
Gotcha.
about half my life ago, actually.
Right.
Wow.
I've been living as long without her as I lived with her. How about that?
That's a good way to look at it. But you know what? She's still here.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Because that's
You
what's
see that
keeping you
plate
going.
over there? That's a little nod to her right there.
There you go. Nice
Oklahoma.
horses. A little wagon.
That's right. Surrey with friends on top.
That's
Chicks
fantastic.
and ducks and geese better scurry when I take you out in a Surrey. I like to sing. I apologize. I apologize for
Don't
nothing.
apologize.
For
Don't
nothing.
ever apologize for singing.
So she would definitely be big for me in that genealogy. If I were to sit down and write a genealogy of my faith, what I find fascinating about that, though, is because I've tried to do this before, there are so many people who are part of my genealogy of faith that are anonymous to me, that I have no idea who they are, and I won't know until the resurrection. Right? It's this situation where I can't even begin to guess how many people and who, what people have actually had that kind of impact on me and set the tradition for me.
So So I read something the other day that suggested, like, what if when we walked into worship, we took a moment and looked around the room and looked for someone who maybe looked kind of downtrodden or downcast, or you look for the person whose shoulders are slumping, or who just for whatever reason catches your eye or your soul, your spirit, and looks like they maybe need a little bit of extra love. And maybe you don't say anything to that person, but what if you hold that person in your mind and in your heart as you pray throughout the service? And what if you just hold them, right? You know what I mean, not physically, but like pray for them, whether you know their name or not. And if we all did that in a worship service, what could change, right? Like, how much more powerful would that experience be if we all did that for each other?
Boy, it'd be fantastic,
right?
I can see that could be transformative in a couple different ways. First of all, I think it's for the person that you're holding in your thoughts, right, and prayers, but just to get your mind off of you during worship is a powerful experience unto itself, right? Yeah.
It's a very good point.
Yeah.
Very good point.
And yeah, because I mean, exactly. Who cares if the person's actually having a bad day or not? Right. It's about, you're praying for another human being.
They're going to have a bad day.
Yeah.
You're preemptive. You know, cover it early.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's true.
Oh man.
Nobody's perfect.
But anyway, so I thought when you're saying, how many people pray for us that we don't realize, and that we've been shaped by, that we're not even aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in my experience, when I was a young kid, we went to a Baptist church, and we got dressed every Sunday. My dad and my mom and all the kids got in the car and we went. When I turned 5, they divorced, and the Baptist church at the time didn't like divorced people to be members of the church. And so they pretty much said, you're not allowed back, unfortunately. And so we split away, and my mom took the kids and we all went to Florida. My dad stayed in Virginia. And he continued going to church. We never went back. It really upset my mother. I would go to vacation Bible school because it was 2 weeks out of the summer where she didn't have to deal with her kids. And that was my only upbringing in a church until I got married when I was 31, and I married a Presbyterian who never missed a Sunday. And she said, we're going to church now. And we did for 30 more years. And we took our kids and we brought our kids up through the church. And they got very involved. And then I ended up working at a church, right? So all of a sudden, it's my occupation now. And I have to, at the same time, maintain my spirituality, because you want to, what's the phrase? You want to be the church, but you don't want to, when you're working for a church, you're not the church. You are an employee of the church. And it's never the same. There's a certain side.
That's true.
I've got to make sure that I maintain the spiritual side, because if I don't, I'll lose it. But I would say that, after I got married and we started going to church, was formidable for me. Because it brought me right back into it. And it was very traditional, the church we went to. And then when they hired me, we started a kids show. So for kindergarten through 5th grade,
that's cool.
A worship service, and did that for several years. And that was a whole new experience. And bringing kids in a live studio audience to experience church on their level. And it was very interactive, and we had a ball with it. And then, it ended up going south because of 2008 and the economy. But beside that, I still have friends that are with me on social media that reach out and say that TV show was very influential for me as a kid.
Cool.
And now they're adults.
That's awesome.
They're like 21, 22, 23. Cool. Some are even older than that. And they remember those times.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's, again, going back to tradition. If you can just get one person to believe, just one. It's a good day.
It
is a really good day.
It's a sense in which the tradition, like what you did there in starting that tradition, you set the stage, and then it's up to the players to put on the performance. But that's what tradition does, is it sets the stage. And without a stage, you can't have performance. Right. Or at least not one you can recognize. Right. And I don't know. I mean, and you have to have a performance that's meaningful for people. You can't just get up there and do it, because it becomes rogue. And you end up just doing the same things over and over. I mean, that's tradition. Look at it. We're in Advent season. What are we doing?
we're doing the same thing we were doing last year and the year
right.
before and the year before because
right.
it's tradition.
It's tradition.
And that's what you do. You hang Christmas lights, you put up a tree.
That's
you,
right.
You hang snowflakes in the Faith and Arts Center. You know,
So how do you,
this is what we
what did you do today, huh?
Yeah, that's what I did all day. I made it snow because I did it last year at the same time.
Let it snow.
Oh man.
Oh, the weather outside.
See, here comes James again.
No, that's your point is right on, because that is always the struggle when you enter to a season that is so sacred to most people and so special. And a lot of people, I think, have a hard time making each Christmas something new, right? Because you are just going through the same motions you did the year before. I had that experience, actually. I make this Christmas tree out of books here in my office, and I've done this now for like 4 or 5 years, I think. And
It's beautiful, by the way.
well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely
But
beautiful.
that's not why I'm bringing it up. Why I bring it
Sure.
up is while I was building it this year, and it takes a good afternoon to do this. I was kind of like, I was almost like, why am I doing this again? Like you know, and not that I didn't want to do it, and I love it, and it's fantastic. But I had the thought that I was like, you know, maybe I should try something new.
Yeah.
Maybe I should do something different. But that's exactly what we do. We go and get a Christmas tree. We decorate our homes, decorate our churches, and we have to go through the same motions of worship services and devotionals and all these other things.
Right.
You know, how do we make sure that we're breathing, you know, or that we're allowing new life to be breathed into it? Because I don't think it comes from us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Every year for Advent, I have told you this before, but I read Scott Erickson's devotional Honest Advent, because, you know, James and I, we spend a lot of time writing the Advent devotional, and then I can't read it after that point. It's, you know, great. Please continue reading it. But, you know, I've read it like 14 times at this point, so I need a new one.
You're proofreading.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing. It's different.
Yeah. But he talks a lot about the experience of wonder. And so the introduction to his devotional is about, you know, like having that experience of Christmas where it's like, oh, I'm just doing the same thing over and over again. Where's the life? Where's the Jesus? Where is it?
Yeah.
And what does it mean to, I mean, he writes the devotional in order to give new language to Advent, which is what he's trying to do. So he
Right.
has his little drawings and, you know, that he offers as a gift to say, like, let's focus on something different.
All right.
Let's look at the same stories, but look at them in a new light.
Right.
And how can that bring God into this? And I think that's what,
That's
you know,
good.
that's what we try and do with the devotional, right? And so,
Yeah.
you know, like what you talked about in the introduction, you know, while talking about the Exodus and Moses during Advent can seem a little bit like going to China buffet for Christmas dinner. What can it do to bring new life, right? Because we're still
Right.
around the table with our family.
Yeah.
You know, the people are still there. So, you know, what's a small thing that we can change
Yeah.
in order to invite God in a new way, to see
Yeah,
God
just
in
to
a
see
new
it in a different way, right?
Because
Just
we get
to kind of
blind.
shift the prism and
Yeah.
see it from a different angle.
Yeah.
You know, I reached out to my kids this year and I said, hey, Christmas is coming up. I need some gift ideas. It's tradition, right? You buy gifts for your kids.
Yeah.
And they in turn turned around and said, make something original.
Nice.
Ooh.
Make something original. Don't go to the store and buy it.
Love
Make
it.
Make it. And then they asked me, what do you want? And I said, I want a family photograph.
Nice.
That's all I want.
Oh.
So we'd all be back together because they're all older. They're all grown. They're gone. They got their
Yeah.
own families.
Yeah.
And so I said, if we could just have make it funny.
Yeah,
You know,
Yeah, it
right,
doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter. Just
Yeah.
make it funny.
Yep.
And so I think I'm going to get that because
Yeah, all right.
they all know Photoshop. They can, and they all live in different parts of town.
Oh.
They can take their own picture, put them
Oh,
all
wow.
in one.
So we're not even talking about all getting together.
No,
You just want the photograph.
No, I just want the photograph.
That's fine.
That's fantastic.
We won't be all getting together this Christmas, unfortunately. Some are
Yeah.
coming in early, and some are leaving town early, but not on Christmas Day.
Yeah.
But, you know,
Yeah.
of course, we work at a church, right? So we're here all
Yeah.
Christmas
yeah.
Eve.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
be here.
Oh, we're here, folks. Y'all come on. Come on
That's
down.
right. Yeah.
We got plenty of room. Plenty of room.
I'm excited I get to hang out with my kiddo for Christmas Eve this year for the first time since she was probably 2 or 3 years old.
Wow.
We're going to watch It's a Wonderful Life together. I'm going to introduce
Yes,
her to a
you are.
tradition of mine.
Look at that.
Which
That's
this will be like the
awesome.
29th year I've done
She's
it.
going to say, where's the color in this movie? Why?
Right.
She's like, this is from when you were a kid. She said that one time to me. She was like, when you were a kid and movies were black and white. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Whoa.
We're watching Back to the Future right now.
That's a great movie, too.
It is.
Oh man.
Well, Alan, thank you so much for joining us, man. This has been a great
Yes,
conversation.
thank you so much.
Thank everyone else out there for listening. If you want to participate in our Advent devotional, it's called Signs of Tradition and Wonders of Experience. We'll be talking about it throughout the season of Advent here on the Dialogic Disciple podcast. You can pick up a copy of that at the church, at Northside Church. If you are not part of Northside Church or can't get to the church, you can get our digital version by going to www.northsideumc.org/email.
Correct.
And then you can sign up for it there. We do an audio version of it as well that comes out daily. So, again, Alan, thank you.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Elizabeth,
Really, this has
thank
been
you.
wonderful.
Pleasure as always.
And guys, we'll see you next week.